Feel free to chime in anytime if you have questions, or at the end, we can also chat about any questions then. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about our co-design and co-creation work, creating immersive learning experiences at our university here in Northwest Sydney. The focus and the examples I'm going to show today are in Scenario VR. I'm sure you've had a big day learning about Scenario VR. And although the sort of the co-creation advice I'm going to be talking about is relevant to Scenario VR here, you can really apply this framework to all kinds of co-creation and all sorts of learning and teaching projects. And I'd just like to acknowledge country here in Northwest Sydney. I'm joining from Darug land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So the agenda today, I'll give you a little bit of background about our work and our team at Western Sydney University. I'm going to introduce you to our double diamond or our modified double diamond process, and then go through each of these stages of how we co-create the first diamond, designing the experience, the learning and teaching experience, and then the second diamond, actually making the experience and refining it, making sure everyone's happy. And then lastly, I'm going to go through some of the key lessons we've learned through our work in Scenario VR and co-creating these types of experiences, and sort of show you some more specific examples of sort of the projects where we had that learning moment. Okay. Just checking, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So perfect. If you're not familiar, is everyone here familiar with Scenario VR, or are there any people who haven't used it?
Let's see, if you want to just pop your answers to Sam in the chat. I will say we have had a couple presentations about Scenario VR.
Oh, good, great.
Most people by now should be familiar. Yeah, familiar, but not everyone has used it yet. Okay,
great. Okay, well, as you probably know, it's a codeless VR creation. Working at our university, we're not a marketing team. We're purely focused on learning, teaching, and research. And so we've used Scenario VR to create all kinds of virtual tours, interactive XR experiences, branching scenarios where you sort of choose your own adventure. We've also captured some really special sort of cultural ceremonies and locations, which has been some really special projects. And we're also working on leveraging Scenario VR to make some really accessible mixed media storytelling and to not just have sort of the one experience, but to choose how you might like that experience. So here's a few examples of our work just to sort of show you some of the things we've been doing.
Now we're on the corner of John Street and Harris Street. This is the northwest corner. We're just down from John Street Square. We're outside the Piermont Point Hotel. These hotels would have been catering to the early working class community here. In fact, the Terminus Hotel, that hotel there dates back to 1841. It was originally called the Piermont Hotel. It's gone through a number of name changes.
The history of therapy is very different from how we understand it today. With uncertain origins in medical practice, therapeutic interventions have had a complex relationship to disability and social understandings of bodies, their definitions and demarcations.
Hi, I'm Peter Garron and I've been working at Northcott as a physio for the last 20 years or so.
Hey, I'm glad you're back in the office today. I really need your help trying to make this decision. Can you help out?
Hi, I'm Andrew, the product manager for Dreamo Plastics. Thanks for the chance to speak with you today and to tell you more about Dreamo.
Ambulance emergency, what's the town or suburb you're calling from?
can see that you're on the monitor already.
How long do I have to stay here? I didn't even know I was coming in today.
Hi Taylor, my name is Renee. I'm one of the midwives that works at the Pregnancy Assessment Unit.
Cool. So as you can see there, there's a really wide range of projects. The way our team works is we're quite a small production team, and we basically collaborate with academics and industry partners and sometimes student partners to make all kinds of learning and teaching experiences. Our team's made up of learning designers, edtech developers, UX, LX specialists, and XR and media creators. And we will work with any discipline, any school, law, medicine, health, social sciences, absolutely anything. And it's an interesting dynamic because we're experts in our field, but then we're working with academics who might have decades of expertise and experience in their field. So it's sometimes a tricky dynamic, and that's what I'm really going to be talking about, how we navigate and how we sort of, everyone's ideas are valid and everyone has something really valuable to bring to the table. So I'm going to be talking about our framework of how we work together to co-create and do that really effectively. Yeah, okay, so moving on. We find that the partnership pedagogy, in our experience, can sort of go one of two ways, and we've definitely experienced both. Sometimes it's a really large advantage, and we're able to sort of harness everyone's skills, their knowledge, their energy, and align it into the project. But equally, sometimes it can be a clash of personalities, it can be a clash of ideas, unproductive meetings, over consultations, and then even just aligning the schedules and getting everyone to meet the deadlines can be really challenging. So back in film school, I was taught that sort of 70% of the work on a project is done in the planning and preparation, before the first shot takes place. And I think that's relevant now to this project, or not to my XR and VR projects now. So much of the really important groundwork needs to be done long before you pick up a camera or plan a location or organize actors. And the other thing is that if you don't do that preparation, we found that you end up sort of making up the time in doing revisions or making changes or even reshooting after you've already done that. So basically our solution to this problem was the double diamond. And we actually made a modified version of the double diamond. The double diamond was originally a design thinking process, but we've basically modified it to sort of suit our purposes of creating educational experiences in a sort of a production perspective. So this is our modified double diamond. We've got the outcomes down the bottom, and then the two diamonds, the design and the create diamonds. Yeah, and I'll just speak through some of the phases. So basically, the first thing, we basically need to set the vision. Projects can come to us in our university in lots of different ways. I'm sure it's the same for you. But an academic or a staff member or an industry partner will say, this is what we think we want to make. They'll have an idea, and basically we'll gather as a team, we'll gather all the stakeholders in the room, whether those are the industry, academics, our production team, and we chat about it. We work out the minimum viable product, the MVP, and talk about any deal breakers, anything that the project has to have or to make it successful. And we'll sometimes use the Moscow framework for this and work out what it must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And then that's basically the kickoff meeting. And then everyone in the team then goes their sort of separate ways from there. And we all do our own sort of independent ideation. So this next phase, the first part of the design diamond, is our ideation and blue sky thinking. And it's actually a really fun phase. And it lets us do some really interesting research and testing. Basically, every team member, it doesn't matter if they have an academic focus or if they have a production focus or a professional or an industry focus, it doesn't matter what the team members' expertise is, we really encourage them to go and do their own research and come up with their own ideas. And so different things we do at this stage, it might be finding similar projects or references for inspiration. Often the Scenario VR public library is somewhere we go here and we look at other projects, we look at what other institutions are doing. And so we find, yeah, inspiration. We'll do reading and research, look for articles, other universities. Something here that's really important to think about is you think in your team, what assets and advantages do I have available to work with? What people, places, stories, existing media can we sort of leverage as a team? Another really helpful thing we do is we chat to learners and other subject matter experts or people in the industry to find out more about the problem or the learning experience we want to create. Chatting to learners to really know what do you want or how will you learn this best is very helpful. And sometimes we might make up rough storyboards or animatics to sort of help, convey our ideas and pitch our ideas back when we meet with the team. And just, it's really important in this phase here is that there's basically no bad ideas and to go really big. It's all about blue sky thinking, and it's great if everyone's as creative as possible. And we want that diversity of ideas. So it's great if an academic has a sort of an academic focus, and the production people can have a production focus. And then hopefully the point of the next stage is to bring those ideas together. So the next point is we meet again, and basically we have like a bit of a pitch session where we all bring our ideas to the table and say, and just talk about it. We listen to everyone's ideas, and you really have to take those ideas with an open mind because everyone, is an expert in their own field and everyone's approaching the problem from a slightly different way. And yeah, sometimes different ideas can be combined, or you can sort of listen to someone's approach and that might spark an idea in your mind. So yeah, that's probably the meeting that happens then. Sometimes you take a bit of time and think about it. Unfortunately, this next part of the diamond is a little bit more serious, and some tough decisions need to be made. Basically, we need to refine that idea. We've done all the blue sky thinking, but now we need to think about, okay, what is actually going to be the learning experience that's going to be most effective for our audience? Some things at this stage here is a little bit similar to the ideation, where we might have to do some more reading and research. We might have to do some testing, look for more examples, or even location scouting if we've got a potential idea of where we might want to make this project. And we have to think about really seriously here. Unfortunately, the blue sky thinking's all over. We have to think about really seriously what is feasible within the time, the money, the resources, the staff members we have available. Yeah, and so just before this middle point here, this is what we agreed to make. We need to sort of come in and we need to decide really clearly and lock in a clear plan. You can do this in lots of different ways. There's lots of ways you can do this, but it is really important you sort of explicitly make some type of document where the vision is sort of outlined quite clearly. At our university, we do what we call a statement of work. And it's like a little bit of like a contract. And even though, it's one big internal organization, sometimes it's just academics and professional staff, but we still have this statement of work, like a contract that you might have with an external party. But that's really important because it allows you to come back to that and everyone to be on the same page. If you don't have that, the idea can change. There can be scope creep. And the project can change, and people might have misinterpreted all this discussion and the refining of the ideas. So our statement of work, we then move on to the actual creation phase and production, and we create a project draft. This is a fun stage where you actually are making things, you're recording, there's actually a lot logistically involved in this stage, as I'm sure you know. But the advantage of having a really good statement of work is that it acts as sort of like a checklist. And if this is a really sort of detailed document, it should give you an exact plan of how many locations, how many actors, how many graphics you need for this stage, the production. And you just sort of work through those and tick those off one by one. And so you just work through until you have a more or less completed draft. We'll get the draft creation and we'll share that. We'll do a bit of a draft review, and we try and get as much feedback as we can from as many different people, not just the project partners in the immediate team, but sometimes we actually try and take this draft to prospective learners, maybe other industry in the field, or academics from different institutions. And we try to take on the feedback with a really open mind. And I just wanted to mention here, something that we find is really important is that when people are reviewing these draft learning experiences, it's really important that you give them context, because often they'll just be seeing this, maybe a VR experience, but they don't understand the context within a course. And so their feedback might not be very helpful or relevant if they don't understand that context and they don't know about the prior learning or the assessment task that it's leading up to. So that is a really important stage in order to get valuable feedback on your draft. You've just got to sort of fill them in and frame them, frame the experience to get the best results. It's good, you know, to get the feedback and apply the changes in as few rounds as possible. So it's not this sort of ongoing loop of sort of showing changes and showing it again and more changes. Thankfully, with Scenario VR, I'm so grateful that the persisting link doesn't change and you can make really small changes on the fly. It makes it really easy, whereas other software, if you have to redo exports or do new upload links, that's sometimes a lot more complicated. But thankfully, as you apply the changes in this next diamond, you can sort of keep that same link and just make those changes on the fly. That's a really great way to have that agile cycle as you're finalizing the project. Just also as you're sort of getting the project ready for release, it's good to do some of the testing. We've never had any problems with any sort of LMS or any browsers or anything like that, but it's always good to just be sure. Sometimes the responsive browser and the responsive layout on a mobile to a desktop can change. So you might design the whole experience on your desktop computer, but then when you look at it on the phone, it might be different. And so you just sometimes have to factor or make those fine little tweaks to make sure that if someone's on a phone or a tablet or a desktop, things are still sort of looking and how you'd like them to. And then publish your project, embed it, test it. Here, this cycle is obviously just for our co-creation, getting that diverse team to design and create. But this cycle does sort of continue. When we publish a project, we always set a review and refresh date for every project. Some, if they're mentioning specific dates, or it might be changing legislation or theories that are changing and developing, their refresh rate might be quite soon. It might only last a year before we need to really review and refresh that. Or if we're talking about, perhaps a historical event, we know that the project we create might be fine for 3 or 5 years. So it is important when you're doing that to just factor in, okay, when do I need to revisit this and update this? And also, it's also handy to just, once you finish this process, we have a project retro, where we basically, the way we frame that is we discuss the 3 L's. What did we like about the project? What did the project lack? And what did we learn from the project? Any findings from this, we sometimes write up into a little actions list, and that helps us sort of improve for the next project. So we're always trying to sort of see where our projects lacked, how we can do better, and then action it. Okay, so that's the sort of the process. Has anyone done anything similar in their work? just seeing chats now. Oh, great. Okay, I'm seeing some good feedback, but yeah, do let me know if you have any questions. I'll keep going. Oops, I don't want to play that just yet. Okay, so some of the key lessons that we've learned through co-creation and some projects, sort of where we had that aha moment and learned. I mentioned this before, but I really wanted to stress this point. When working in a diverse team, it's important to leverage the skills, the experiences, the assets, the locations, and the people in your team to make your project sort of stand out or to make your project really unique. An example of this project is our Global City Processes Piedmont field trip. And we created this with an academic, Dr. Cameron McAuliffe from our School of Social Sciences. So basically for this project here, we had an academic at our university who had been running field trips to a very old area of Sydney for almost 10 years. He was an absolute expert about this area, and he also had a massive archive of historical photos, stories, knowledge already, and he was a really sort of passionate storyteller. So we had lots of all this really sort of interesting stuff to play with. We really easily were able to sort of leverage his knowledge, his passion, his archival images, and we were able to go around Piedmont and film these short 360 micro lectures. That's what we called them. And then it also gave us scope as the technical team. We weren't having to focus too much on, finding images or, materials or statistics or graphics, because our academic partner had all that ready. And so we were able to have a bit of fun and work with editing some of these images to superimpose them on the existing buildings in a sort of a mock augmented reality type look. You would have seen some of those examples previously. But yeah, we were just able to focus our time and energy as the technical team to play around and to try something new, because basically we're able to leverage his archival photos that he had already sourced over his 10 years of sort of research in this area of Sydney. And so that was a really, really fun project. It was actually designed as a project where the students would go and stand on that exact street corner and watch the scenario VR on their phones and sort of have one ear in. And so they could listen to the micro lecture in situ and they could look at the buildings there. That's the way it was originally designed. And then we had COVID hit and students were locked down and they couldn't travel to Piedmont. And so it ended up just purely being a virtual field trip. And that was really great because students' learning could continue uninterrupted during COVID, and they could do these field trips. Another thing is that some students had different sort of the access was different. This day here, when you're walking around the whole suburb on the actual physical field trip, it's actually quite a few hours of walking around the city, and it might be a hot day. And so some students with different physical disabilities, it wasn't suitable for them. So that this virtual sort of mixed reality field trip was really handy for just to make that experience as successful as possible for all students. And I'm going to be talking about that later. We were able to, in an amazingly short amount of time, we filmed over 20 of these short micro lectures at different key points around the city, just basically because of our academic had all these stories ready to go and all this existing knowledge. And the project was really, really successful and had great feedback and won teaching awards and all kinds of things. So yeah, that was just sort of that key point I wanted to mention is just think, in your team, leverage those different skills and those different project partners. We're finding this is really helpful as well. We're working a lot more with industry partners on co-creating projects, and our industry partners bring this real practical knowledge you know, they've been on the ground, you know, in healthcare or in other things, and so they bring this amazing practical knowledge. And then our academic team sometimes brings the theoretical framework to underpin this. And then we bring our technical expertise and help bring these experiences all together. Yeah, so just think, you know, when you're co-creating, you know, what can everyone bring to the table and how can we maximize these efforts to make a really cool collaboration? Okay, now, next project. This one here is called Understanding Disability, an Exploration Through Time. And you would have seen a few snippets of this project as well in that sort of opening montage. Here we go. Okay. Just something I wanted to touch on is I really would encourage, you know, we found we had a realization where we wanted to think about how we can create our VR experiences and make them as accessible and enjoyable for the widest possible audiences. I know 360 technology has been around for quite a few years, but for some learners, it's still quite new. And sometimes you need extra support and onboarding so students can have a really enjoyable experience to navigate around and feel good in the technology. I think our technical team, I think we're a bit too close to the technology because we'd been working in scenario VR, I think 2019 or 2018 even, we'd been working in scenario VR. And I think that we'd taken it for granted, the sort of the click and the drag navigation, and we had sort of assumed that learners were just naturally doing this. But when we worked on this Understanding Disability project, we had a really great multidisciplinary team. We were collaborating with Professor Karen Soldatic at our university, who's an expert in sociology and anthropology. And she just brought this new perspective to scenario VR that was just so helpful to us as the technical team who were sort of a little bit too close to the technology. And we were able to like drastically change and improve our onboarding and the navigation. I'll just pause it on. There are a few things. It was quite a heavy project talking about the history of disability, but Karen was able to help us design this experience and onboard users who had different physical and just, yeah, different sensory needs as well. So they were able to sort of customize the scenario and navigate quite easily or in different ways. Even the using the mouse keys, using the click and drag, and then we also use the scenario VR Snap to features. So if you didn't want to do that and you wanted the navigation done, there was different ways. So yeah, that was a really sort of valuable project. Things like the providing captions, yeah, having the toggle options for music and audio. So if you want the full experience, it can be a little bit overwhelming, or if you want to strip it back or absorb one piece of sort of audio media at a time, you've got that option. Yeah, and we were able to do that. And it just meant that this project, both for our students and also our project partners at Northcott Disability, just everyone was able to enjoy the experience in different ways, because VR, like it can, you know, it depends. There's a way to go with accessibility, I think, and I think it's important to think about that when you're designing your project. Captions and also including really diverse voices, all kinds of people, and the actual participants involved in these programs was really good for understanding disability. It's hard to design and create a VR experience that will suit all audiences and all different sort of abilities and needs, but I think basically the key lesson we learned was it's good if you can try and integrate options in your scenario VR. And so if learners can sort of design or just curate that experience a little bit, then that's really good. And I think it's just a good approach to all scenario. And the lessons we've learned in terms of onboarding and making sure people know how to navigate or have multiple options for navigation, we've definitely taken that from our findings and learnings from this project about understanding disability, and we apply that to every project now to just make sure that students aren't thrown in the deep end, that they are sort of just gently eased into it. And if 360 or VR technology is new to them, they're just sort of eased in gently. Okay, and then, so just lastly here, our key lesson, what I wanted to mention, it's important to have a really hard think and be very deliberate when you select your locations for VR. So, or also the other thing is prepare your locations really carefully to make them as impactful as possible. It's really important to sort of understand, and it takes a little bit of time to think about what translates well in VR. Because sometimes even a stunning landscape, it might be too big, and then not appear with enough detail for your learners. So sometimes it takes a little bit of testing and a bit of trial and error to work out what translates well as a location. I find myself thinking about this quote from Jonathan Griffith, who has made some incredible films like Everest VR. He's an amazing VR director who's sort of a trailblazer, and saying you want every shot to be really exciting. The only tool in your disposition is location, because all you can do is put a camera in a location. You can't do anything with the lenses because it's meant to be our human vision, which means that getting the location perfect is everything in VR. This is not quite the case with scenario VR, because with scenario VR, we're lucky we have hotspots. We can augment the scene with all kinds of media, with photos, audio, questions, or even 3D objects. There's so much we can do with scenario VR to make something good. But I think it is really important that you start with that you need to start with something that is quite impactful or powerful. And it shouldn't just be a bland old classroom or something that the student's familiar with. It's really great if you can select a location that immediately transports or immerses the learner somewhere special. I feel like if you're starting strong and the 360 image or the video is sort of grabs the student, you're already starting ahead. And then if you augment the scene with more interesting media, that's a sort of a recipe for success. And so the case study that where we really learned this was this land and culture virtual field trip. And so this was done, basically, this is where we captured some really unique locations and ceremonies with an Aboriginal elder, Dean Kelly. This was a partnership project with our School of Education academics and National Parks and Wildlife Services. And basically, what we did was we went to the Royal National Park on sort of the south of Sydney. And a bit of an interesting fact is that our Royal National Park is the second oldest national park in the world, second only to your Yellowstone. And so it's a really large national park. It's very beautiful, it's coastal, and it has a lot of Aboriginal history. And so Dean Kelly was an absolute expert, and he took us to these locations around Royal National Park. But when I say that, I mean that some of these locations were kilometers and kilometers down single walking trails, and then we're lugging the 360 camera, or it's at the beach there at sunrise for a dawn ceremony. And that's still a long way to get get there before dawn to set up in the dark. And so as a production team, as our sort of with our academics and our project partners, Dean from National Parks, everyone had to sort of put in some really hard yards to get those locations with the right weather conditions at the right time of day. It was really, really, really hard work. But we found that the students who watched it, they were incredibly appreciative, and they loved it. All these locations, it was a really good learning experience. I don't have any of the hotspots or any of the augmented. This is just the raw footage of this project, but you can sort of get a scope of some of the locations and the ceremonies. And yeah, we just found that the students were incredibly appreciative and really enjoyed it. And again, it was a field trip that's sometimes conducted that was stopped during COVID. That's not accessible for every student. Some students from different parts of the country or the state can't get there, and some students with different physical abilities can't go for these bushwalks and don't get to experience these things. So it was just really great to be able to capture these and share these. And also we were able to go to locations where some ancient sort of Aboriginal art is, and Dean was able to show us, and we're able to film it, but because of risk of the art being damaged, you can't bring large groups of students to these locations. So we were able to show some amazing things in VR that aren't particularly, that we can't just sort of bring large groups to. So that was another very special thing. Yeah, so just stressing that point on location. It's so important to have that powerful base layer in an interesting story, maybe having a really strong storyteller or a voiceover. And if you start with this strong foundation, then you can only augment the scene with other hotspots and media if it requires. But yeah, like one of the reasons just showing, just the 360 layer is that if the audio, the soundscape, and the scene is quite sort of immersive, you're already starting at a big advantage. So basically that's our co-design, co-creation process, the double diamond. And then there's a few examples of projects that we've used that double diamond to create, and some of those most valuable lessons we've learned during the process. That's basically all the formal stuff I'd prepared. Would anyone have any questions?
Yes, Sam, that was awesome. I really want to go to Australia now. We have some questions. What camera did you use to film those 360 projects?
So we have been doing, like I mentioned, I think 2019, we started dabbling. I think the first one, you'll actually see a bit of an evolution of cameras, because the first one in the Piedmont cityscape, you might notice there's some glitching and there's some effects. I think that was the Insta Pro 1, the very first camera, the sort of the first professional scale 360 camera. And so there were some stitching challenges, some overheating challenges, some glitching. We did have to battle that. Then I think I think the Royal National Park, I can't remember if that was still the Pro 1 or it might have been the Pro 2. But basically we've very fortunate. We've able to upgrade our camera over time. So we have the Pro 1, the Pro 2, and then recently have the Titan. I don't think any of those projects that I featured use the Titan just yet. But yeah, basically we started with the Insta360 Pro for Piedmont. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Royal National Park was actually the Pro 2, but we found the Insta360 cameras are getting increasingly reliable over time. We definitely had some issues with that first model, and although we did a lot of work with it, we were constantly having some little bugs and challenges and glitching errors, but the cameras are sort of becoming increasingly stable over time. We're getting less stitching errors. Yeah.
Awesome. And then do you have any kind of recommendations or best practices for the amount of text that you put into those like info cards and hotspots and things? Do students complain that it's difficult to read if there's too much text?
We try to keep it relatively short. We sometimes what we've done in understanding disability, when we created a sort of the option to read the voiceover rather than to listen to the voiceover, because the voiceover was a few hundred words. We ended up separating it as multiple text slides, I think maybe with about 100 or 150 words, and then we would have maybe 3 of those. And then again, that's also the co-creation sort of balance we need to strike, because when we're working with academics, sometimes academics love going really deep and providing these really long explanations or histories, whereas as a media creator, we try to keep things to quite short, punchy. We understand that everyone's attention spans are sort of changing and getting shorter. So we lean towards shorter sections of text, sort of single paragraphs or even just sentences. So it's hard to strike that balance between sort of having that academic rigor and detail, but also just capturing people's attention and conveying something really short, sharp, and so it's a hard balance to strike, and sometimes we need to compromise and have sort of longer paragraphs or sections of text. But yeah, I generally lean towards shorter is better. And also the other thing that's really important, we find at our university, is that based on our statistics and research, is that it's amazing, it's mind-blowing how many students are doing their learning on their mobile phones. And so when there's obviously lots of different ways we can create those text cards, but we need to make sure that it's legible on a mobile phone, because we're shocked by how many students are doing their learning. So sometimes what a text card on a screen can look so different on their mobile phones. So I would just say maybe do the phone test and have a look on your phone and see if it's still legible and a good experience, because we've definitely been surprised by how many students are accessing on their mobiles.
And that was actually the next question that I was going to ask is, are you designing this for phones or headsets or desktops? So sounds like a lot of phones. Yeah, desktops and phones. I mentioned it briefly, but the responsive design of Scenario VR and when we've had sort of A and B options, we've designed it on and created it on a computer, of course, but then when we've taken it to the phone, sometimes the two options are going closer together, and then when you look at it on a really wide screen, the options are sometimes really wide. And so that's why we've moved forward with our designs. I didn't really show too many examples there, but with our branching scenarios, often our options are stacked and they're vertical, and so you're picking A, B, or C rather than sort of different options, because basically it center aligns everything, and it means that no matter what device, whether it's tablet or a widescreen or a tiny phone, you've sort of got those options and they're always center aligned. So that's one little sort of lesson we've learned, and a little hack that's just kept things, no matter what device, it's kept your navigation and your options nice and clean. That's a good tip. Okay, so one more question. The examples you showed, are those created 100% in Scenario VR, or are you doing any sort of rendering in another Unity or one of those engines? No, everything's been created in Scenario VR. The Royal National Park field trip, I just showed the 360 footage. I can't show that project, the finished one, publicly. But yeah, no, we are doing separate projects in Unreal Engine, in Unity, but the projects I've showed today have all been in Scenario VR. The Piedmont example, where we made those sort of mock AR effect, where we had the buildings overlay on others, that took a lot of photoshopping to get it right, those sort of effects, and we have some talented graphic designers in the team. So that did take some detailed sort of photoshopping and masking and warping the perspectives to get things right.
And we also shot those scenes and were very deliberate about our camera placement on particular street corners, knowing what sort of archival images we had in the bank. And so those were sort of designed to be edited and then put in. But yeah, it's all been done in Scenario VR.
Okay, awesome. Follow-up question to that. This is a real question. I'm not even planting this, but how easy is Scenario VR compared to Unreal and Unity?
Like it's incredibly easy compared to Unreal and Unity. It's amazing. Like it's so I don't have a like a coding background or anything like that. My background was a traditional 2D film, so shooting and editing. And so Scenario VR was so good for me because yeah, I can't code, and so it was really easy to learn. I think if you start small and then it's a really quick sort of learning curve, and you can end up pushing yourself. It's the same thing with the sort of the user interface, and we've developed those like the multiple choice questions and the branching scenarios, all of those things to be able to do those codeless. Is and even me with my you know, again, I'm more of a video editor, but to be able to do the graphics works and the graphic designs, we often use Figma to create the user interface, and then those extra little buttons and navigation, and then bring those into Scenario VR. Sometimes we're using the options that are available inside there, but yeah, it's incredibly easy to do. You start small, but yeah, it's almost like a very different purpose to Unreal and Unity, just because of how complex they are. You can really learn Scenario VR in a day, whereas those will take you a few years to learn to get to like a really sort of functional level. Yeah, that's sort of the major comparison I'd have.
Yes, and I will say that for some projects that our custom team has built, they'll render like the images and the videos in Unreal or Unity, and then they put those into Scenario VR to add the interactions like the hotspots and pop-ups. So they can work together, or you can do everything in Scenario VR depending on your experience and your skills and your project budget, of course.